My daughter told her husband I was a burden. A problem to be managed. So I bought the apartment next door, and now, once a month, she knocks on my door to hand me her rent. She learned, in the quietest way possible, that this burden was the foundation her entire world was built on. If you believe that family should be a safe harbor, but that sometimes you have to build your own lighthouse to find your way home, then do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You are about to hear how the quietest woman in the room can cause the loudest earthquake, and how I turned my daughter's cruelest words into my greatest source of power. Part 1. The Unraveling of Us. For 25 years, the scent of burnt coffee, sizzling bacon, and bleach was the perfume of my life. I was a waitress at the Sunrise Diner, a place where the linoleum was perpetually sticky and the regulars knew my name. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was an honest one. It was the job that bought my daughter Rachel school shoes, paid for her braces, and kept a roof over our heads after her father decided that the responsibility of a family was a cage he needed to escape. I raised her alone. Every double shift I picked up, every holiday I worked, was for her. I'd come home, my feet aching and my hair smelling of the deep fryer, and find her asleep on the sofa with the TV still on. I'd carry her to bed, her small body a warm, trusting weight in my arms, and I'd feel a fierce, protective love that made all the exhaustion worth it. I wasn't just her mother, I was her everything. Her shield, her provider, her constant. My life was a series of small sacrifices laid at the altar of her future. And I was happy to make them. I thought I was weaving a tapestry of unconditional love, a bond that nothing could ever break. When Rachel got married to Mark, a junior marketing executive with a sharp suit and an even sharper smile, I was proud. She was building a life for herself in the city, in a sleek, modern apartment building with a lobby that smelled like lemon polish instead of bacon grease. I saw her success as my success. My tired feet had carried her to a place where she would never have to worry, never have to struggle the way I did. I thought my job was done. I imagined a peaceful future for myself, quiet evenings with a book, maybe tending to a small garden. But life has a funny way of rewriting your plans. It started in my early 40s, with a strange, persistent dizziness. At first, I dismissed it as fatigue. But then the world would tilt without warning, sending me stumbling into tables, my hands grasping for something solid to hold on to. Then came the pain, a deep, searing ache in my lower back that shot down my leg like a bolt of lightning. The doctors called it chronic sciatica and labyrinthitis. Fancy words for a simple, brutal truth. My body, after decades of carrying heavy trays and standing for 12 hours a day, was breaking down. The double shifts became impossible. Soon, even a single shift was an agony. My savings, never substantial to begin with, began to dwindle at an alarming rate. I was trapped. Too young for retirement, too broken to work the only job I'd ever known. It was Rachel who suggested it. "Mom, this is ridiculous," she'd said over the phone, her voice laced with what I thought was genuine concern. "You can't live like this. The guest room is just sitting empty. Why don't you come stay with us? Just for a little while. Just until you get back on your feet." Relief washed over me so intensely it made me weep. My daughter. My Rachel. She still needed me, and now I needed her. It felt like the natural order of things, the completion of a circle. Mark seemed agreeable enough, flashing that perfect smile and telling me, "Of course, Linda. Our home is your home." So I packed 2 suitcases with the pieces of my small life, gave up my tiny rented house, and moved into their guest room. The apartment was beautiful, all cool grays and minimalist furniture, like something out of a magazine. It felt sterile, a world away from the lived-in clutter of my own home, but I was grateful. So deeply, achingly grateful. The first few weeks were pleasant. Rachel would make me herbal tea, and Mark would ask about my day. They treated me like a visitor, a guest they were happy to host. But a guest, by definition, is temporary. And as my body refused to heal, as the weeks bled into a month, then too, the atmosphere in that pristine apartment began to change. The change was subtle at first. It was in the small things. The way Rachel's smile would become a little tight when I asked for help reaching something on a high shelf. The way Mark would retreat to their bedroom to take work calls, his voice a low, annoyed murmur on the other side of the door. The invitations to join them for dinner with their friends stopped. Instead, they would go out, leaving me a plate of leftovers in the microwave. The silence in the apartment when they were gone was cavernous, a stark reminder that I was living in someone else's space, on someone else's time. I tried to make myself useful. I did the laundry, washed the dishes, kept the already immaculate apartment even cleaner. I tried to be as small and as quiet as possible. I felt like a ghost, haunting the edges of their sleek, successful life. The pain in my back was a constant fire, but it was nothing compared to the growing chill in my heart. I was no longer a guest. I was becoming a fixture. An unwanted piece of furniture they didn't know how to get rid of. The breaking point, the moment the quiet erosion of my worth became an earthquake, happened on a Tuesday night. It was raining outside, the water streaking down the large picture windows of their living room. I had gone to bed early, the pain particularly bad that day. But I couldn't sleep. I got up for a glass of water, my bare feet silent on the cold hardwood floor of the hallway. As I approached the kitchen, I heard their voices. They were low, hushed, but sharp with an intensity that made me freeze. "I can't do this anymore, Mark," Rachel whispered. Her voice, the same voice that used to call for me in the night after a bad dream, was now a blade of ice. "She's always here. Always needing something. I come home from work and I can't relax. It feels like I'm suffocating." I stood motionless in the darkness, my hand clutching the doorframe. My breath was trapped in my chest. Mark's reply was a low, condescending rumble. "What did you expect, Ray? We knew what we were getting into. She doesn't have any money. She can't work. We're practically her babysitters." "But it was supposed to be temporary," Rachel hissed back. "She's not even trying to get better. She just sits around all day. It's embarrassing. What are we supposed to tell our friends?" Embarrassing. I was an embarrassment. Then came the final blow, the words that would be seared into my memory for the rest of my life. Mark sighed, a sound of pure, unadulterated annoyance. "Of course she's a burden," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any compassion. "She's a financial and an emotional drain. Honestly, she should just be grateful we haven't kicked her out. She has nowhere else to go." A burden. The word didn't just hurt, it redefined me. In that single, ugly syllable, I was stripped of my identity as a mother, as a woman, as a human being. I was reduced to a problem. A weight. A thing to be tolerated. The 25 years of sacrifice, the double shifts, the aching feet, the lonely nights, none of it mattered. It hadn't purchased love or loyalty. It had only purchased a temporary tolerance that had now expired. I didn't get a glass of water. I turned, my movements stiff and silent, and went back to the guest room. I lay in bed, staring into the darkness, and felt the tapestry I had spent my life weaving unravel thread by painful thread. I was a stranger in my daughter's home. Less than a stranger. I was an object of her resentment. Standing in that dark hallway, I realized I wasn't their mother anymore. I was an infestation. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I could not stay another second. Part 2. The Echo of a Goodbye. Sleep was impossible that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the words echoed in the darkness behind my lids. Burden. Embarrassing. A drain. They weren't just words, they were verdicts, delivered by a jury of the two people I thought I could count on most. I lay perfectly still on the pristine guest bed, the expensive high thread count sheets feeling like sandpaper against my skin. The rhythmic sound of the rain outside was a mournful drumbeat, counting down the seconds of my old life. Before the first hint of dawn painted the gray city sky, I was up. My movements were slow, deliberate, infused with a strange and hollow calm. The grief was so immense it had circled back on itself, leaving a void where the pain should have been. I pulled my 2 worn suitcases from the closet. I folded my simple clothes, the faded jeans, the soft sweaters, the sensible shoes, and placed them inside. Each item was a relic of a life I no longer recognized. I took nothing that wasn't mine. I left the bottle of expensive hand lotion Rachel had given me for my birthday on the nightstand. It felt like a prop from a play, and the performance was over. I wrote a short note, the pen feeling heavy and foreign in my hand. Thank you for everything. I'm feeling much better now and have found a place of my own. I don't want to be a bother any longer. Love, Mom. Every word was a lie, a carefully constructed shield of politeness to hide my shattered heart. Love. The word looked alien on the page. I left the note on the kitchen counter, on the cold marble island where they had passed their judgment on me. I slipped out of the apartment as the city was just beginning to stir. The air in the hallway was cool and silent. I didn't look back. Rachel didn't call until late that afternoon. I was sitting on the stiff, questionable bedspread of a cheap motel room on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place that charges by the week and smells of stale cigarettes and despair. The room was a grim, brownish-yellow box, a stark contrast to the cool grays of Rachel's apartment. Mom? I got your note, she said. There was no panic in her voice. No worry. There was just a flatness. A carefully neutral tone that screamed relief. You found a place? That's great. Where are you? It's a small place, just temporary, I lied, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. I just needed my own space, you know. Oh, okay. Well, that's good. I'm glad you're feeling better, she said, the lie hanging between us, unspoken. Let me know if you need anything, okay? But she didn't press for an address. She didn't offer to help me move. She didn't ask if I was okay. It was the perfunctory call of a daughter checking a box off a to-do list. Task: deal with mother. Status: complete. She had wanted me gone, and I had gone. It was as simple as that. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. When I hung up, the silence in that dingy motel room was the loneliest sound I had ever heard. The days that followed were a descent into a quiet, personal hell. The physical pain in my back was a constant, throbbing reminder of my body's betrayal. But the emotional pain was a new and terrifying landscape. I had spent my entire life being for someone. My identity was forged in the fire of motherhood. Now, with that stripped away, I felt terrifyingly adrift. Who was I, if not Rachel's mom? I was just Linda. A 42-year-old woman with a bad back, no job, and a dwindling bank account. I spent my days watching daytime television, the canned laughter of the sitcoms a grotesque counterpoint to my own silent misery. I'd watch families on the screen, loving and supportive, and feel a pang of bitterness so sharp it tasted like acid. At night, I'd lie awake, the neon sign of the motel blinking rhythmically, casting morbid colors on the walls, and I would question every decision I'd ever made. Had I loved her too much? Had my sacrifices not been gifts, but crutches that had kept her from developing a spine, a heart? I had to be careful with my money. The secret savings I'd painstakingly built over the years, my rainy decade fund I used to call it, was all I had. It was a little over $40,000, a pathetic little fortress against the world, and every week the motel bill took a chunk out of its walls. I ate cheap takeout, my meals consisting of greasy noodles and lukewarm soup. My world had shrunk to the 4 walls of that room. About 2 weeks after I left, Rachel sent me a text. Hey, Mark and I are having some friends over Saturday. Just wanted to check in and see how you were doing. Smiley face. The cheerful emoji was a tiny, digital slap in the face. She wasn't inviting me. She was making sure I wouldn't show up. She was confirming that the coast was clear, that her embarrassing burden wouldn't be there to disrupt her perfect, curated social life. That was the moment the grief finally, truly began to curdle. It transformed from a deep, aching sadness into something colder, harder. It became anger. A quiet, slow-burning rage that started in the pit of my stomach. How dare she? How dare they sit in their beautiful apartment, laughing with their friends, while I was rotting in a motel room, all because I had become inconvenient to them. The image of them toasting with wine glasses, while I was a ghost in their past, was a poison that seeped into my soul. My daughter had discarded me like a piece of old clothing that no longer fit her style. Her husband had assessed my worth and found it lacking. They had written me off. They believed I was finished. Powerless. A non-entity who had conveniently removed herself from their lives. I was sitting on the edge of that lumpy motel bed, staring at a water-stained ceiling, when I saw the notice tucked inside an old newspaper I'd picked up from the lobby. It was a small, unassuming ad in the legal section. A foreclosure auction. For an apartment in the Northgate Tower, the very building my daughter lived in. Apartment 7B. Right next door to her, to apartment 7A. And suddenly, the darkness in my mind was pierced by a single, dangerous spark of an idea. Part 3. The Blueprint of Retribution. The spark ignited a fire. For the first time in months, the fog of depression and pain began to lift, replaced by a clarity so sharp it felt like a weapon. I read the auction notice again and again, the cheap newsprint crinkling in my trembling hands. Apartment 7B, Northgate Tower. It felt like a sign from the universe, a cosmic joke with a punchline only I could deliver. My anger wasn't loud or explosive. It was cold and methodical. It was the focused energy of a woman who had nothing left to lose. I spent the next 48 hours not on pity, but on research. I used the spotty motel Wi-Fi, my laptop balanced on my knees, and I dove headfirst into the world of foreclosure auctions. I learned about liens, titles, bidding processes, and the cold, hard calculus of real estate. The part of my brain that used to calculate dinner tips for a table of 12 and keep track of a dozen different orders was now processing legal documents and financial reports. I found the public records for apartment 7B. It had belonged to an elderly couple, one of whom had passed away, and the other had been moved to a nursing facility. The mortgage had fallen behind, and the bank was now looking to offload the property quickly to recoup its losses. The opening bid was listed at $35,000. My heart hammered against my ribs. My entire life savings. $42,312.58. It would take almost everything. It was a gamble of such terrifying proportions that it made me feel dizzy. If I lost, I would be truly destitute. But if I won, oh, if I won. The thought of it was a balm on my wounded soul. The first step was to see the apartment. I couldn't bid blind. I called the realty company handling the auction and, posing as an interested investor, scheduled a viewing. Putting on my nicest and only blouse, I took a bus back to the part of the city I had fled. Walking into the lobby of the Northgate Tower was a surreal experience. The scent of lemon polish was a visceral reminder of my humiliation. I kept my head down, my heart pounding, terrified I would run into Rachel or Mark. The realtor, a young man in a suit that was too tight, unlocked the door to 7B. The air inside was stale, smelling of dust and disuse. The furniture was gone, leaving ghostly outlines on the faded carpet. The wallpaper was peeling in one corner, and the kitchen appliances were hopelessly outdated. It was neglected, forgotten. Just like me. But as I stood in the living room, I noticed something else. The layout was a mirror image of Rachel's apartment. And the wall, the thin, unassuming wall behind which the sofa would sit, was the wall that connected our two homes. I pressed my hand against the cool plaster. I could almost hear their voices, their laughter, their judgment. I could almost feel the vibration of their lives. And in that moment, I knew I had to have it. This wasn't just an apartment. It was a vantage point. It was a throne. The next week was a blur of frantic, secret preparations. I had to get my finances in order. I transferred my entire savings into a cashier's check, a terrifyingly official piece of paper that represented my entire life's work. Holding it felt like holding a bomb. I did a title search, spending money I barely had to ensure there were no hidden liens on the property. I studied the rules of the auction, memorizing the procedures, the hand signals, the cadence of the auctioneer. I was preparing for battle. I didn't sleep the night before the auction. I sat in my motel room, the cashier's check in its envelope on the nightstand beside me, and I played the scene over and over in my head. I imagined winning. I imagined losing. I imagined Rachel's face when she found out. That last thought was the fuel that kept my fear at bay. The auction was held in a drab, soulless conference room downtown. It was filled with about 20 people, most of them professional, hawk-eyed developers who smelled of money and predatory intent. I felt utterly out of place in my simple clothes, a lone guppy in a shark tank. I took a seat in the back, my hands clenched so tightly in my lap that my knuckles were white. When they called out apartment 7B, Northgate Tower, my heart leaped into my throat. The auctioneer started the bidding at $35,000. A man in a pinstripe suit raised his paddle instantly. 35. My mouth was dry. My plan was to wait, to not seem too eager. But the fear of losing it was a physical force. Another developer bid 36. Pinstripe suit went to 37. They were batting it back and forth like a toy. This was a game to them. To me, it was everything. The bidding stalled at 38,500. The auctioneer began his final call. 38.5, going once, going twice. This was it. It was now or never. I raised my paddle, my arm feeling heavy as lead. My voice was a reedy, unfamiliar squeak. 39. The room went quiet for a second. All eyes turned to me, this unknown woman in the back row. The pinstripe suit developer looked at me with a dismissive smirk. He raised his paddle without hesitation. 40. My blood ran cold. 40,000. That was almost my limit. After closing costs and fees, I'd be left with practically nothing. This was the moment where reason and caution told me to walk away. But then I saw Rachel's face in my mind, heard her voice. A burden. Pinstripe suit was smiling, confident he'd scared me off. The auctioneer started his count again. $40,000, going once. I lifted my paddle again. The words caught in my throat, so I just nodded, a single, sharp gesture of defiance. The auctioneer understood. I have 40,500. Pinstripe suit's smile vanished. He frowned, annoyed. He conferred with an associate next to him. He was deciding if this sad little property was worth the trouble. The seconds stretched into an eternity. He shook his head and gave a dismissive wave to the auctioneer. He was out. 40,500 going once, going twice. Sold. The gavel fell, and the sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. It was over. I had won. A wave of nausea and pure, terrifying adrenaline washed over me. I felt like I was going to be sick. I felt like I was going to fly. The apartment was mine. I had bet my entire life on this one move. Now, all that was left was to send the official notice and wait for my daughter to realize her burden was now her landlord. Part 4. The Tenant in 7A. The days following the auction were a whirlwind of paperwork and logistics. I signed a mountain of documents, my hand aching, my mind buzzing with a mixture of terror and triumph. The last of my savings was gone, transferred to the bank in a transaction that was both liberating and petrifying. I was now a property owner. I was also completely broke. The official transfer of ownership was handled by a small, no-nonsense law firm I'd hired. As per my precise, written instructions, they drafted a formal notice to be sent to the tenants of Northgate Tower, informing them of the change in ownership for apartment 7B, and, more importantly, a change in the landlord for the adjacent rental unit, 7A. The building's previous owner had also owned Rachel and Mark's apartment, renting it out. With the foreclosure, both properties were sold as a package deal. It was a stroke of luck I hadn't counted on, a detail buried in the fine print that turned my plan from simple revenge into a masterpiece of karmic justice. The letter was clinical and impersonal. It simply stated that effective the 1st of the next month, all rent payments for apartment 7A were to be made out to the new owner, Ms. Linda M. Peterson, and delivered to apartment 7B. I spent the next 2 weeks moving in. I used a cheap moving service, 2 guys and a rickety truck, to transport my few belongings from the storage unit I'd rented. My old sofa, my worn armchair, my boxes of books, they looked shabby and out of place in the empty apartment. But as I began to clean, to scrub the floors and wash the windows, the place began to feel like mine. I bought a few gallons of warm, creamy white paint and spent days slowly, painstakingly covering the faded, depressing wallpaper. Every brushstroke felt like an act of reclaiming my life. I worked quietly, mostly in the evenings, a ghost moving into the apartment next to the one I used to haunt. A few times I heard them through the wall, the muffled sound of their television, the faint murmur of their arguments, the shrill sound of Rachel's laughter. It was a strange and powerful feeling, to be so close, yet completely invisible. They had no idea their world was about to shift on its axis. The 1st of the month arrived on a Friday. I had spent the morning arranging a small pot of geraniums on my new windowsill. The sun was streaming into the living room, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of something that resembled peace. I was nervous, my stomach a knot of anticipation. But I was also ready. At around 6 in the evening, there was a knock on my door. It wasn't a loud, confident knock. It was hesitant, uncertain. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my sweater, and opened the door. And there she was. My daughter. Rachel. She was holding a letter in her hand, the notice from the law firm. Her face was a mask of utter, complete disbelief. Her perfectly styled hair, her expensive silk blouse, her look of urban sophistication. It all seemed to crumble before my eyes, leaving behind a confused, stunned girl. Her mouth was slightly open, as if she had been in the middle of saying something and had forgotten the words. Mark stood just behind her, his face pale. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by a look of dawning horror. Mom. Rachel finally choked out, the word a whisper of confusion. What are you doing here? I gave her a small, calm smile. The same polite, placid smile I'd given her the morning I left. I live here, honey, I said, my voice soft. I'm your new neighbor. Rachel stared at me, then down at the letter, then back at me. The pieces were clicking into place in her mind, forming a picture she couldn't comprehend. The letter. It says the new owner is Linda M. Peterson. It says the new landlord is. Her voice trailed off. She couldn't say it. So I did. That's me, I said gently. I bought the apartment. Both of them, it turns out. Funny how life works, isn't it? The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I have ever heard. It was filled with the weight of their condescension, the echo of their cruel words, the sheer, dumbfounded shock of their utter miscalculation. Mark looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Rachel's eyes filled with a complex mixture of emotions. Shock, then confusion, then a deep, burning shame that colored her cheeks a blotchy red. She was still holding the rent check for that month, tucked inside a crisp white envelope. Her hand was trembling. For a long moment, nobody moved. The bustling sounds of the city outside seemed to fade away. It was just the three of us, standing in the doorway, a new and terrible power dynamic clicking into place. Slowly, as if in a trance, Rachel extended her hand, offering me the envelope. I took it from her. The paper felt warm from her hand. Our fingers brushed, and she flinched as if she'd been burned. She couldn't look me in the eye. I'll be expecting it on the 1st of every month, I said, my voice still quiet, still calm. I'm sure you'll be excellent tenants. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to lecture them. The situation itself was the entire speech. The humiliation in their eyes was my victory. Word travels fast in an apartment building. The neighbors, who had seen me leave with my suitcases and had now seen me move in next door, put the pieces together. The whispers in the hallway, the knowing glances in the elevator, they weren't looks of pity for me anymore. They were looks of judgment for the ungrateful daughter and her arrogant husband. The burden had become the boss. Now, every month, like clockwork, there is a quiet knock on my door. Sometimes it's Rachel, sometimes it's Mark. They hand me the envelope. They never make small talk. They can never meet my gaze. And every month I take their money, the money that pays my mortgage, that buys my groceries, that keeps a roof over my head, and I thank them with a polite, unwavering smile. Music begins, soft and triumphant. I used their rent money to fix up my apartment. I installed a new kitchen. I bought a comfortable armchair for my bad back. I made it a home, a sanctuary built on the foundation of their disrespect. They thought my worth was tied to my ability to earn, to serve them. They never understood that my true value was in my resilience, in my quiet strength. They tried to throw me away, but they forgot that I was the one who had taught them the value of a home in the first place. Now, I own theirs. They are living, month by month, under the roof of the woman they called a burden. And that is a debt that they will never, ever be able to repay. Music swells slightly. Sometimes, the best way to prove your worth is to make it undeniable. Have you ever had to quietly and completely turn the tables on someone who wrote you off? Share your story in the comments below. I read them all. And if you believe in the power of quiet, calculated justice, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories. Until next time, remember that a solid foundation can withstand any storm.